Sweet. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 15 of the Really Really Badly podcast. Today we just want to take a moment to finally getting around to some of the amazing responses we've gotten from you amazing people. So we have 3 friends in particular we're going to bring up. There's been others that have also reached out to us just to say that they enjoy what we're doing or given us some good kudos, so we thank you for that. We don't want to minimize the response to those. Those have been fantastic. Absolutely keep them coming because those encourage us quite a bit. But we picked out these 3 because we thought there was something we could actually maybe talk a little bit about. And yeah, start addressing this conversation, get it going. Mm-hmm. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
And we're going to jump right in here.
Let's do it. So first one we got was from, well, we're not going to say their names, are we?
Yeah, we forgot to ask this person for if their permission to keep them non-anonymous. So we're gonna just try to keep it anonymous for now. But yeah, good high school friend of both Brandon and I's. Super amazing person, and basically they just wrote here that they had listened to episode 2 and. They say, it reminded me how blessed I am to have incredible friendships that started all the way back in high school. I never thought back then that we would all continue to be friends over 10 years after we all met. I think for me, what I love most about deep friendships is being intimately known by someone and loved for being me. When you're with good friends, there's no pretense or need to impress. You can simply be you. That brings so much peace and comfort to life, when in most other aspects of life, you always have to be on and on top of your game. Thanks for talking about friendships. I know it has played a huge role in my life as well. Smiley face. So, yeah, I mean, in this one, like, I could not agree more. This is like one of those topics that gets me so stoked when you're talking about just deep friendships and what it means to be authentic and vulnerable with people. And I mean, I think, yeah, the thought that some of our high school friends are still our closest friends now is amazing. That to me is pretty cool. There was a lot of people in even college that I talked to who either weren't such a fan of their high school friends or weren't close to their high school friends, or maybe they had a rough time in high school, so they didn't, necessarily want those friendships or whatever, which is all understandable things. I just think we were incredibly blessed to have that, and not to say that we're the only ones that were like crazy special with it or whatever, but it's been something that I am glad has stuck out and that I'm just super grateful for. I mean, an example, you're going to be the best man at my wedding, and we met in 7th grade, I think, became friends like 8th, 9th.
Yeah.
Another one of our friends, Scott, we met in 7th grade, and he's going to be a groomsman. I mean, that's super, super awesome.
Yeah.
And then this person who wrote us too, they are of the female gender. And I've said this before, but those girls that we hung out with in high school were incredible examples to me of someone who is, of a girl who is just solid, down to earth, I would say godly, just decent human being. And I think that having female friendships like that in my life back then really helped me in my dating life to find and seek out really solid people who are just awesome people, and then now finding Megan, who I'm going to hopefully marry in April. And that's huge. And so I think that, friendships are they're insanely good and insanely impactful on our lives. And I think sometimes it's good to sit back and just be wowed by that.
Yeah, totally. Be thankful for that. I love what this person said about when you're with good friends, there's no pretense or need to impress. You can simply be you. That brings so much peace and comfort to life, when in most other aspects of life you have to be on and on top of your game. Yeah, I think she hit it right on the head. Like, I'm always very cognizant of when I have to be on, when I'm gonna be interacting with these people, or I'm going to this social event, or I'm at work, or whatever, or if they're just friends that you're not quite as close with, but you have to be on, you have to be funny, you have to be quippy, you gotta have something interesting to talk about, or at least that's how it feels. Yeah, you don't necessarily have to, but I think that she's absolutely right, is that what makes a good friend is knowing that you can just be with them, enjoy their company, and that they're enjoying yours, and you don't have to, there doesn't have to be this pretense or this need to impress, like she was saying. Like, I think that that's so special. And when you do find that, whether you're still living close to those people or not, like, being able to keep fostering that and keep, just appreciating that, just being wowed by it is great. I think it adds so much to your life. I think she hit it right on the head.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something that's worth striving after, which, again, I think we touched on it a little bit in that episode about friendships, but how it can be really hard in those kind of adult years where you've maybe moved away from friends, or you've started a new job, or you're no longer in a dorm room living with people. I mean, it's still hard for me. I've been out of school for like 2 years now, and I still find that to be really hard. Like, I don't even know if I've necessarily found like a deep friendship outside of that college setting or high school setting. Maybe through other friends I have, but not on my own. Like, I'm really bad at that one, and I'm sure we'll have some more conversations about that going forward. But in what she says here about what she likes most about friendships is being intimately known by someone and loved for being me. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest desires that humans have, is to be known and to know someone intimately, as another friend of mine would say. I think that there's nothing really better than that. Mm-hmm. At least I can't think of anything. So,
yeah, it's good stuff.
So again, thanks for reaching out. It's awesome to just hear other people who have experienced some of the same stuff that we have, some of the things we're talking about these deeper friendships. And I hope that our friendships continue way, way down the road, even farther than high school. So that's really cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then our next one, this one comes from another best friend of mine, and you're good friends too with Landon by now.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so thanks for asking a really hard question. That made me go actually research things. That was good grief.
What was this episode?
This was in relation to the episode on attention. And so I'll just read here what Landon said, but he says, I recently listened to the episode on attention and found it very interesting. But as you said in the episode, the research you did seemed to open up more questions than provide answers. I'd be very interested to hear more about the study that said our attention spans are affected by our emotional state. And then he goes on to say, I think I'm just going to read the whole thing and then we'll break it apart. But I think in my personal experience, I've found that during a deep emotional experience, whether painful or joyful, my attention span for that specific topic is not shortened, but rather lengthened, sometimes to a point of obsession where it's all I think about. I think this does mean my attention span for other areas is certainly shortened because I'm distracted by whatever obsession is consuming my attention. And other times in life when I'm experiencing emotional turmoil, not related to one specific event necessarily, but all of life causing some emotional stress, I think my attention span decreases overall. I float quickly from app to app on my phone, almost as if I'm looking for distractions, perhaps as an escape mechanism. I also tend to escape into Netflix. I've always assumed that it was the technology, social media, fast-paced TV shows, constant new content that was decreasing my attention span, but maybe the uptick in those things just coincide with decreased attention span from emotional turbulence. Mm-hmm. More than my attention span decreasing during periods of emotional turmoil, I've noticed that my memory doesn't work as well. I can only remember fuzzy topics from conversations I've had with people. When I do remember a conversation topic, I often forget who I had a conversation with. It drives me crazy, especially because I think I put a lot of identity in my memory. I'd say a big part of who I am is that I'm someone who cares about people and remembers conversations and remembers specific life experiences other people have told me about and remembers what is important to people in order to care for them better. When my memory doesn't work as well, I don't feel like the me I want to be. Maybe the cause is the emotional turmoil that leads to the decreased attention span. That means I'm not able to pay close enough attention to details and then can't remember things. Then he says, this is all kind of personal experience, not based on any research I've done or anything, but I wanted to reach out and tell you guys some of my thoughts following the episode. And then he goes on to, just says he appreciates some of the topics and thinking deeply.
Nice things.
So we thank you for that. It's been awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Len.
And this one, I spent a lot of time yesterday trying to decipher some pretty technical, usually things I would just stay far, far away from. I don't understand these things, but it was really good. And I don't remember the specific study that you had mentioned about emotions relating to attention spans, but I did find plenty from other people. So cool. Hopefully it'll suffice. And this one is going to be there's going to be quite a few links on the show notes page for this one. So for any of the references, we'll have it all there for these studies or these articles that were published. But yes, do you want to start with what you found?
Yeah, well, I think I failed to mention this. This was episode 8, by the way, on attention. Okay. I think that the study I originally mentioned, or even just the phrase talking about being emotionally distracted and losing attention span because of that, that was from Daniel Goleman, his name is, Goleman. And he wrote the 1995 book Emotional Intelligence, was a New York Times bestseller. And I don't know if he coined the phrase emotional intelligence. Yeah, and basically in one of his, I think it was in his book, he talked about how there are two types of stimuli that are difficult to ignore, especially with attention span. One is sensory, which could just be that loud guy at the cafe sitting next to you, or just all the sounds going on and you're trying to write an email or something like that. So that's all sensory. It's coming at you. It's messing up your attention span. But then what's much more difficult to ignore is emotional distractions. And these are things that are just throwing you off for whatever reason. They're triggering strong emotions, anger, anxiety, being fearful of something. The idea is that distraction will instantly become your mind will just zoom straight to there, no matter what it is that you're trying to work on, and therefore totally messing up your attention span because you won't have focus to give to anything else. You'll just be focused on this emotional thing that you can't seem to solve or get over. So that's what he's referencing, I think, when he's talking about that.
Yeah, and I found some research too that definitely backs that idea up. So this is an article that was published in a book, or I guess encyclopedia, called Brain Mapping and Encyclopedic Reference. The article is called Interactions Between Attention and Emotion. And I will have, again, all of this linked. They do they reference tons of studies throughout this article. So if there's anything that you need to read up more on, go to that. And also just to note, because I'm not a scientist and I do not understand their language very easily, I have to read this stuff like 3 times. If I totally misinterpret something or like completely mess something up and someone out there is way more knowledgeable on this, again, please let us know. Please correct us. Maybe we can have you on to clear some stuff up. But this is what I got from that. So I'm just going to read some of what they said. So they said emotion alters neural representations of stimuli at an early sensory processing stages, with emotional stimuli evoking greater activation than neutral stimuli in relevant sensory regions. Emotional stimuli are also more likely to break through sources of distraction or interference to achieve awareness. So this is kind of what you were saying about the coffee shop when you're like trying to focus. So they say perhaps one of the most famous examples of this phenomenon is the cocktail party effect, wherein people are perfectly capable of ignoring other conversations at a cocktail party while socializing, but will end up orienting to one of those background conversations if something emotionally relevant is uttered, such as their name. Wow. So, and I mean, we all know this, right? When you're in a restaurant having a meal with somebody or in a coffee shop talking to someone, you're totally there with them. You're not hearing all the noise and distractions and other conversations going on. But if you hear your name, like that'll rip you out. I mean, like you go straight to that thing, right? So I thought that was really interesting. And then they go on to say, strikingly, attentional advantages for emotional stimuli are observed even when neural regions related to perceptual processing are damaged if the amygdala remains intact. So bear with me for a second here. I'm just going to read this and then I'll talk about it. Okay. For instance, spatial neglect patients have difficulty orienting their attention to the contralesional hemifield due to parietal lobe damage. However, these patients can still detect emotionally expressive faces in the neglected hemifield, and these faces still evoked heightened activations in sensory processing regions compared to neutral faces, even when they are neglected. Converging evidence from blind sight patients who have lesions to the primary visual cortex, removing one visual hemifield from awareness, demonstrates that these individuals remain able to discriminate emotional stimuli based on the blinded hemifield, despite difficulty judging non-emotional stimuli. So I had to, So I had to go, and it's once you like kind of like really like, I had to read that like 5 times when I was reading it, but it's really interesting. I had to go look up what hemispatial neglect is, which is defined by the inability of a person to process and perceive stimuli on one side of the body or environment where that inability is not due to a lack of sensation. So basically what that's saying is like sometimes when people have damage to what they call it, like a lesion or something, basically if something's damaged in the brain, you can have this, it's called hemispatial neglect, where you can't see or like perceive, I guess, stuff on one side.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's not due to the fact that you're not sensing it. Your eyes are still sensing what's going on. You're just, it's a processing problem because of the damage, right? So you're still sensing it, but you're not processing it. So therefore it appears that you don't see it, right? And so basically what that paragraph was saying, if you didn't understand it all, was saying that people with these spatial neglect patients or blind sight patients, they actually, where does it say here? They can still detect emotionally expressive faces much better than neutral faces. So basically emotion, right?
Wow.
So all of that to be said, you're like, why are you talking about all this crap? Basically the whole point of this being in relation to Landon's question is that yes, emotion
cuts through.
It's very important, right? Yeah. It
Wow.
cuts through when it comes to attention. And obviously this is talking the more technical term of attention on like literally what your attention is on, not so much like your attention span, but I think it does relate as we go. You'll see that. So basically what they're saying is that emotional stimuli enjoy privileged representation in sensory and higher order processing. So the brain actually gives it a a priority
Wow.
over other things. So going back to that cocktail party example, or if you're in a coffee shop, priority is given to things that are going to have some kind of emotion connected to them.
Wow.
They go on to say a couple other things. I'd encourage you to go read it. It's not the longest article, so you can get through it in half an hour, but well, maybe half an hour if you have to read it like 5 times like I did. But I just thought that was I thought that was really interesting that it seems to be kind of backed up.
That's awesome. Because Goleman has a phrase. I'll post to a little blog post that he did on his site. But yeah, he said that the brain's wiring gives preference to our emotional distractions, creating pressing thought loops about what's upsetting us. And he says it's because our brain wants to pay attention to what matters to us most, like problems in our relationships. So, which makes sense to me when I read that, but that's so interesting that the science actually backs it up as well. That like the brain literally will put priority onto emotional things that you care about and value. That's very interesting.
Yeah, totally. And then as far as so I think that can kind of show where our focus is. So when Landon, let me just go back to Landon's email here, but when you say, when you're in a deep emotional experience, whether painful or joyful, your attention span for that is lengthened. I think that again would make a lot of sense, because if it's a deep emotion, right, and that's some of the research, it kind of showed that it doesn't matter whether it's good or bad necessarily. We'll get into that in terms of memory in a second, but I think that would make a lot of sense, if especially if it's something specific, right? So like if you know what it is, you can have that obsession with trying to, like you said, like relationships, like figure out why it's wrong, or like why it's, trying to figure out a problem or something. And then in terms of memory, because you mentioned kind of memory like being fuzzy if you're going through emotional turmoil, I thought was really interesting, because basically in this other article called The Impact of Emotion on Perception, Attention, Memory, and Decision Making, which again I will link to, it says memory processing can be divided into 3 stages. So you've got the encoding stage, which is when you're taking in information, processing it. The storage and information, consolidation, which is the storage of information in the brain, and then retrieval, which is the amount of remembering. So that, like what we would say memory. And emotion can have a modulating effect at each of these stages. So the storage of information doesn't end immediately after information is encoded. It takes a little bit of time for memory traces to stabilize in a consolidation process, which largely depends on the hippocampus, which is a part of your brain. And it says, so during the consolidation phase, memories are fragile and prone to disruption and modification. So the memory trace representing an event can be strengthened. In this case, the memory will be remembered later, or weakened. In this case, the memory is forgotten or distorted. So emotion may modulate this consolidation process. A strong emotional response elicits psychological arousal, by which the amygdala can modulate hippocampal activation, leading to an augmentation of specific memory traces. So not that I understand completely the process of what's going on there, but it's basically saying that your emotional state is going to affect how that information is stored. So once it's been encoded, when it's in that storing process, which can take some time, which again is I think why, when you're in college and high school, they tell you like when you study to like, I remember like you tried like all the different tricks in the book, like the optimal time to study is like 1 hour before going to bed, so that you can have that time to like sleep on it and stuff like that. But I mean, there you go. That's kind of why, because there is a process to how that information is stored. And so right there, like your your amygdala can affect that hippocampus area of the brain when it's storing that information.
Yeah.
So I think Landon, you hit it on the head with some of this stuff just by your own life experience of what's going on, and it's actually kind of amazing that you like recognize it too, because like that's just very deep. Like I don't know if I would have caught that in my own life, just kind of seeing these connections. But another thing I'd read about this is something called mood congruence and mood dependence, which I found on another article. Basically, mood congruence is we remember events that match our current mood. Thus, when we're depressed, we tend to remember negative events. And then there's mood dependence, which refers to the fact that remembering is easier when your mood at retrieval matches your mood at encoding. So,
wow.
Yeah, I remember this from, I don't know if it was high school or college, but one of our teachers, they were talking about what it's really like, again, one of these like optimal, I don't know actually how much this affects like studying and doing well as a test, but if you can, when you take a test, if you can emulate the same environment that you learned the information in, you'll be able to recall the information better. So to take a test in the same room, in the same seat, at the same time, whatever, is better than taking it in like a different room in a different environment, which is kind of like the same thing that this is talking about. Wow. So you will, so you'll remember easier if your mood is the same at when that memory happened, which is kind of interesting. I think this is really interesting.
Very interesting.
So turns out that, there is actually seems to be a pretty good tie to that. And you could really get lost down the rabbit hole. I could have read so much more on this stuff. But I just picked out some things that I thought would at least maybe either get you started in reading about it or that would help that along. I did want to talk about when you're going through an emotional turmoil that's not related to one specific incident, and it seems like that's when you're jumping from thing to thing to thing. I didn't find anything necessarily related to why that would be, but just thinking about it, maybe the reason why it's your attention span is lengthened when it's a specific instance versus when it's not specific is because, I don't know, maybe you're trying to solve the problem, and if you're a fixer, you're like focused on fixing it. Whereas if it's something that like is kind of nebulous and not, you can't put your finger on it, you kind of get overwhelmed and then maybe withdraw and look for those escapes because, especially if it's an emotional thing that is not fun to feel, we tend to want to like get away from that. And so that could be why that's happening. But I think as far as like the memory and then your attention span being lengthened, like, you're really onto something there. So it was super interesting to read about. A little bit technical, but it was really good. Yeah,
that's fascinating. I feel like I'll be chewing on that for a long time, actually. That's great.
And check out those articles because they were pretty interesting, and they mentioned a lot of different studies and stuff that you could read about. Cool. And I thought that was really interesting. And it's funny because I've never been someone who's like, it's interesting to talk to people who do have really good memories, and Landon, you're definitely someone who has like great memories. But like I, for some reason, just feel like I'm not, like I just can't remember stuff like you do as far as like conversation you have with people and like the little details and like the details of like what's going on in people's lives that are close to you and stuff like that, which I think is an incredibly valuable and really cool ability to have. And I don't know, it just got me thinking about like, okay, so maybe I'm not just naturally bad at it, or if I am, like, I wonder if there's something to do with mood or emotion that could help improve some of those areas, some of that memory. So I don't know, it's really interesting. So
it's awesome. It's really cool.
So thank you for writing in. That was good. It was a lot of good stuff to think about for me. We do appreciate it. It's awesome. And thank you for your kind words as well at the end.
And let us know if you have more thoughts, because it feels
absolutely.
like a very interesting topic.
Yeah. And I love to kind of expand my own understanding of some of the stuff we're talking about. Because obviously, if we're going to talk about something and talk about why it may or may not be a problem, and then figuring out what to do about that, it really can help to understand some of the details, even though I'm not a scientist and I don't study that stuff at all. All right. Totally. So last one we've got, last response from another listener, is in regards to episode 9, which was why motivation is overrated. There's a lot to say here, or a lot to, I guess, address here. So I'll just like read a snippet and then maybe we talk about it once we feel like we got something to talk about there.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And kind of just break it down that way.
Sure.
All right. So this listener says, I feel like I have a lot to say in response because I think it's an interesting topic. I definitely have a lot of areas in my life where I'd like to be more disciplined, but I think overall I'm a pretty self-disciplined person in regards to getting my work done, keeping things organized and cleaned, or committing to a time to learn about new ideas. I think in regards to the whole motivation piece, it's interesting, and bear with me as I try to piece together my thoughts. So it's interesting to hear about all the steps you can take to become motivated, as if motivation becomes a checklist item along with other items needed to be completed in order to accomplish a goal. I think that as I was listening to you guys, I kept asking, what's the point of motivation? You're basically procrastinating the action you want to complete if you're so focused on feeling motivated. And I think that was kind of our point. Maybe we didn't get it across all the way, but I think that's what we were kind of saying with the fact of like, you can't depend on motivation, right?
Yeah.
Like, and if you are, then yeah, you will just be procrastinating. That's why it's important to have these steps of discipline in place to counteract that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think, and I don't think that they're saying that they disagree with us. I think they're just going along with what we're saying, which I just do want to reinforce. Like, yeah, like that's a good point to make, is like, if you're just waiting on motivation, you can actually just be procrastinating.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of interesting because, I mean, I feel like we were kind of all over the place in the topic just because it is kind of such a big thing, you know? So we're kind of figuring out, the healthy balance and all that. I mean, everyone is. I think if we're talking about motivations are your reasons for wanting to do things, then obviously you need reasons that you want to do things. But if we're talking about like the feeling, you know, like, and which is what I think she's talking about here, what's the point of, you know, then yeah, she's right. It is just procrastinating the action just in hopes that you can get this feeling of motivation.
Yeah, totally. And that's why I'd say, like, if motivation is there and it helps you to get stuff done, run with it. Don't fight against it. Like, that's great. But you got to recognize there's going to be times, many times, more often than not, that it is not there. And that's why we're presenting this whole concept as why it being overrated. Mm-hmm. So we're going to keep going here. Yeah. Because it gets really good. But yeah, so to be honest, I'm not a very motivated person. There are very few things that get me inspired to start doing something. One of them being coffee, which, yes, coffee is the best.
Gross.
The rest I could give or take. Now, before I start sounding depressing, I guess what I mean is that a lot of what I do and accomplish is because I've trained myself to do so. Was I a good student in elementary school? Heck no. But that didn't stop me from becoming a speech therapist. Did I always like reading? Never. I just forced myself to do it, and over time started to like it. Was I always clean and organized person? Nope. I just had to learn to do it because I do think better that way, and I was sick of my mom yelling at me for losing everything. I know there are such things as type A and B people, but part of me wonders if I conditioned myself into becoming a type A person, because there are certainly particular habits that I've developed that were not present during my early years. That being said, I've lost a little bit of something, imagination and creativity. Now you're probably wondering how this relates. Well, when I was younger, I used to be motivated by these two things. I used to make up worlds with my stuffed animals and always found a way to play with whatever was around me. During school, I would think of stories in my head rather than having to listen to the teacher, because I was so fascinated by imagination and was not motivated by school. In fact, my mom would say that there was definitely a period in my life where I was constantly in my own world. Looking back on my elementary self, I am thankful for the growth and ways in which I have worked hard towards something and disciplined myself. However, sometimes I wonder if what I do has any why behind it. I sometimes wonder if my way of doing things is only because it's a habit or I have to, rather than a motivation. And I think sometimes I'm so self-disciplined I can even get into a rut because my actions have no meaning, but are simply a to-do list that I must complete. In fact, in college and on campus, a therapist told me to stop doing things because I should, but rather because I want to. I think towards the end of college, I've noticed more of this in myself, and I've been practicing on doing things not because I should, but because there's a sense of joy and motivation to the end goal. Thus, I think it shows how discipline can become dangerous, robotic, in fact, just as a heavy basis on feelings can cause a human to become too irrational.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's a lot there.
It's a lot there. I think that's great. I mean, we talk about balance, right? And about how everything needs to come in moderation. And I think that you and I are definitely on the side of discipline, and we talk about it a lot anyway, whether it's on the podcast or just the two of us talking, we're oftentimes talking about how we can develop more discipline. But I think that this person's absolutely right, where, yeah, there does need to be a sense of joy in the end goal, and doing things because you want to do them in the end. And maybe you'll have days where you lose sight of your why, and you lose sight of that joy. But yeah, I think that's great. I mean, living a life of joy and full of inspiration is what we kind of want really, really badly to do for people, right? And I think that, yeah, discipline and tools and these tools that we're talking about can, they're tools to help you get there for sure. But that doesn't, you don't want to be a robot. Anyway, yeah. I find myself, identifying a lot with what this person's been saying. Because I often feel like I'm going in between two worlds. When the one world is where it's a lot of feeling, and it's a lot of like, I feel motivated to do this, so I'm going to do this today, but then tomorrow I might not feel motivated. I feel like I'm often between that world and then the world of just doing things because I should, that word should. Can get kind of ugly sometimes. Like I should be doing this, but I'm not, and it sucks. And,
No, totally. Yeah, and I thought this was really interesting too. I mean, and I love what you say about balance, and I think this is something we're going to go back to. I mean, over and over and over again, is this sense of having balance in your life, because nothing that happens in our lives happens in isolation, right? Going back to last week's episode, which we actually recorded today, so it feels like today's episode, but talking about delayed gratification, we mentioned the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, right? So impulses and emotion versus your cognition, thinking, rationale. And one of the articles I read trying to answer Landon's question, which I'm going to like totally mess this up, but their basic idea was, way back in the day, old philosophers, they had this idea that these two things were in conflict with each other, right? That we had our emotions and our impulses and our desires, which would fight against our cognition, our rationale, our thinking, like what's best for us versus what do I feel. And really, these things interact together in a way that creates a whole picture of how our emotions and our attention and our interactions all work together. They're very, very closely related systems that work together. And they gave reasons for this when I was reading it, which I don't remember what all the reasons were, that were very scientific and specific and had to do with people who experienced. They were basically saying, so like why, like if someone has damage to the emotional side of their brain, why do they really, really struggle even when it comes to something cognitive? So they're basically showing that these things actually work together. If they were so separate, then like if someone had damage in one area, why don't they just excel in this one area where they don't, because they have these things work together, is kind of what they were saying. So anyway, and I think that that's important to realize, because the motivations which come from like our goals and our desires and our dreams can work in a way that help the self-discipline and help us to stay out of that rut necessarily. And what we're mostly arguing is that you just can't depend on that all the time, right? But I think they bring up a good point, because you can't just become so focused on one thing over the other. We've shown, right? You can't be so focused on motivation that there's no point. You're just procrastinating all the time, like they said above. But you also can't be so focused on this like self-discipline where you just become this like robotic person who isn't really finding that joy and that why, that drive. I mean, that's what's so great about motivation is it does give you like a sense of drive and like why behind your life. Like we talked all the way back in episode 1, why it's so important to have this why behind what you do. So I think it's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I mean, it sounds weird, but like I don't feel like hanging out or being friends with someone who's a total robot about everything. Like,
yeah,
you know, I feel most comfortable. Like, I think there was a study somewhere. I wish I'd looked this up. I thought of this before. Maybe I'll put this in the show notes. But there's a study out there that suggests that we are more drawn to people because of the shortcomings we have in common, rather than like our high points or like the things that we're most proud of about ourselves. Like, we're often drawn to people when they say, yeah, I struggle with this. And then you say, well, yeah, me too. And what I'm trying to say with that is that humans are flawed, and we're going to be flawed. We always will be flawed. And if you just portray yourself as being this super disciplined, super like perfect, I've got everything together, you know, you won't be able to relate to people as much.
I think that's good. And one thing to note too is, like, again, with this balance stuff, sometimes we're going to be pointing out an area that we might see or feel in our own lives or generally in our culture's lives that we think could use a little bit more focus. And I think that the whole self-discipline thing is something that people in general could use a little bit more focus on. I think in a lot of things in life, the emotion side of things, like it's so much easier to follow that, and we have that good, like we get that, we don't have to like train ourselves necessarily as much to like follow that. And I think that that's the reason why some of this stuff we point out is on that more like cognitive, like learning side that we have to do to bring that balance back into place. And that's kind of just so people know out there what we're getting at. So then this next section is really interesting. She says, this kind of segues into the whole healthy addiction piece that Brandon was asking about. In my personal experience, I don't think there's a such thing as a healthy addiction. The way I define addiction is a reliance on something you can't live without. Getting a little too personal here, but in high school as a ballerina, I was known for my healthy eating habits. Is eating healthy a good thing? Heck yeah, it is. But it wasn't a healthy habit. It was an addiction. A reliance to live and be a certain way. So much of my identity and who I was based on self-discipline habits that I developed for dance. But when I stopped dancing, my world fell apart. I developed an eating disorder because even though I wasn't dancing, I still had to maintain the image of being a skinny girl who eats healthy. Thus, the whole idea of eating healthy was something that I relied on and became a part of me. Now, obviously, the idea of eating healthy became very skewed at this point. But still, why did I rely on it so much? In hindsight, I'm not sure it's sick. I'm not sure, and it's sickly, but I think every human often puts their identity or idealizes something earthly. But my word, those earthly things can break you. I think that's why we all need God, why I need God. I'm not going to get all preachy now, but I think that even as I write this, it makes me wonder how people who don't know God survive. Maybe I get wrapped up in earthly things more than others. That being said, I do not think there is such a thing as healthy eating habits because a habit is a behavior, not a reliance.
Or,
let's just say...
Do you think? Is that what she said?
Sorry. Yes. That being said, I do. Thank you. That being said, I do think there is such a thing as healthy habits because a habit is a behavior and not a reliance. Let's just say that a man who loves running is confined to a wheelchair after an accident. If the man viewed running as an enjoyable habit, it would still be hard to let go of the activity, but the idea of it being a behavior almost gives hope to channel the energy that was for running into a new healthy habit. Now, if it was an addiction, this man could be utterly devastated. When it becomes an addiction or reliance, it becomes a part of who we are and can really injure one's identity. So that's why I think a healthy addiction is not a thing, because no addiction is healthy, even if that particular addiction is good for your body. Everything should be in moderation. Everything, your talk really hit home for me. I really loved episodes 1 and 8, but this one kind of blew me away. So thanks for doing this. Thanks for being vulnerable and sharing your ideas. So thank you. That was really kind. And yeah, that last piece is pretty dense, but I think she makes a good point.
Yeah, I think so too. And yeah, And like I said in the episode, I'm kind of still working on this idea, and I think that she's right. I think that the word addiction itself just doesn't lend itself to moderation. It's kind of what I'm coming up against, you know. We say everything in moderation, but I don't know if an addiction can be in moderation. That's kind of the nature of it, right? It's something that you have to have, otherwise you can't function well. Yeah, and so maybe it's kind of a different terminology that I need to look for. Just because I was looking up this, I actually decided to look up Travis Barker. I think in his book, Can I Say, he talks about his addictions, struggles, and talks about how he replaced his bad addictions with good addictions. And I haven't read the whole book, so I don't totally know what I'm talking about. Feel free to pick it up, by the way, if anyone's interested and wants some good reading material. My roommate raves about it.
Wow.
Yeah, but yeah, he said that basically he feels off if he doesn't get a chance to run or work out. He said it's like a meal. I need it every day. Yeah, I can't just sit there. Even in the studio, if there's downtime, I can't just sit there. They say sitting is the new cancer. I kind of agree. Yeah, and so it's him talking about running and fitness as his new addiction, I think just needs kind of a new terminology, or at least, you know, for me, yeah, it's something that, like a good habit that you have in place, or a good meal, you know, or something. I don't know. Still working on it, but I really do appreciate this person's insights into how you can take something that is good, you know, that is beneficial, that is healthy, and when it becomes a part of your identity where you have to have this thing or else you will not be you, how that can take it to the extreme and make it a very unhealthy thing. Yeah, I think that was, yeah, I really appreciate this person being able to open up about that. Yeah, and she's absolutely right. And we talk about everything in moderation. I think this is a great example as to why, right?
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I love that line, right? No addiction is healthy, even if that particular addiction is good for your body. I mean, that's crazy. You know, you think about, you know, people who are just like obsessed with, you know, working out, right? Working out's great. It's super helpful. It's necessary even, right? Like you said, he says, I like a good meal. I need to run or whatever, to exercise, to get my body moving. Like, there is truth to that, but taken to the extreme, it can be very, you know, like emotionally unhealthy, or maybe not emotionally unhealthy is the word.
Yeah. Well, and people take it to the physically unhealthy too. You know, I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen someone in the gym where you're just like, oh my gosh, like, do you have any nutrients in your system right now? Like, you know, or you see them there day after day after day, and you're worried about them, because it's like, I worry that you're going to exhaust yourself, and that's not healthy either, you know? So. And
that's why I say, you know, the whole identity thing is huge there. It's like when your identity gets so tied into something like that, and it can be taken away, like that's, I mean, you know, just think about the things that you enjoy doing, the things that might be habits, or you know, this like term healthy addiction or whatever. I think the important thing to ask yourself is like, if this was taken away, would my life fall apart, right? Because if you become an unstable human being, then that's not good. That is not healthy. That is, yes, that's an addiction. That's bad. And so, and you know, and it's, I mean, like, when she brings up the point, like, of like why she thinks that she needs God, I mean, like, I agree with that on a personal level, there being a Christian. And that's, I find it very interesting when we talk about, you know, purpose, and we talk about like this meaning, and we talk about having lives that we can feel fulfilled in. And this will maybe come up more in the future, but it is one of those things I think about that I just go, I don't know. It'd be really interesting to hear someone who doesn't believe in a higher power and a higher purpose talk about that, because I don't know, in my mind, it would be a very hard thing to do. And I think it would be a lot easier to put your identity into things that would become addictions rather than just healthy habits. But But that's just
Yeah.
for what it's worth.
Yeah, this email in particular made me feel like we should do maybe a talk on identity a little bit. Identity forming and, I don't know, maybe narrative. Talking about your own story. I don't know. This email made me think about a lot of different things, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it was really good. Yeah, super good to think about. And yeah, makes some really good points. So I think I would concede, that there's maybe not, such a thing as a healthy addiction, but like you said, like the wording and what you're actually talking about, like the technical word versus what Travis Barker might be kind of referring to, maybe it could be worded differently, but I think it was really good to think about. And we love the feedback. We really appreciate the feedback. Thank you for your kind words, and thank you for just getting us to be thinking. Thanks for writing and being vulnerable and open. Like, that's pretty awesome.
Totally. Yeah, and I would just say to any of our listeners, like, if you want to join the conversation as well, or drop us a line, doesn't have to be as long as some of these responses. If you do have a lot to say, then please just go for it. We love reading this stuff, but even if it's just a small thing too, like just one phrase that you liked or that you wanted to add to, like, please leave us a comment or an email. reallyBadlypodcast@gmail.com, or just go to reallyreallybadly.com, pick an episode. This is 15, so 1 through 15, and just leave a comment at the bottom of the page. We'd love to hear from you. We'd really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We love you guys, and we'll see you. Hopefully we'll do some more of these listener episodes in the future. It's been great.
And for your weekly inspiration for this week,
yes.
I recently finished a book series by, I believe his name is Lev Grossman. He writes this series called The Magicians, which is basically like it's like taking the concept of Harry Potter, but like it's more grown up, it's more grounded in reality, and it's really, really good. So,
nice.
Yeah, I'd highly recommend it.
All right, we'll see you guys next time.
Take care.
Bye.
Ending.
I'm sorry. How's it going, John?
It's pretty good. That's good. Got to go for a walk with little Dexter.
Oh, sweet.
Gonna have one.
I miss Dexter.
Yeah? He has no concept of who you are.
Oh, I'm sure.
Do you recognize him?
So cute.
Look, it's Travis.
I love his. Oh my gosh, that skull pendant. That's hilarious.
Wanna go for a walk?
He gets a big old boner every time John's around.
But oh my gosh.
Yeah, pretty much.
Have a good.